Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
And now as we deepen into our service, I'll share some opening words for this morning from Zach Norris. There are two ways to think about safety. There is a fear-based way and a care-based way. The framework of fear is rooted in and begets traumatization, systemic suspicion, and isolation. A culture of care involves an investment in relationships and building our capacity to relate to one another across difference. Safety is not tied to our capacity to watch our neighbors, but rather based on our capacity to truly look out for one another. The paradox of proximity means we can't run from ourselves. The answer to safety is always closer rather than farther away. Only together can we create safety. Our program for this morning is entitled A River Between Us, and our speakers are Nicole Montclair Donaghy and Jim Kambeitz. Nicole Donaghy is the executive director of North Dakota Native Vote, and James Kambeitz is the co-founder of Lightspring Solar. Their families have lived across the river from each other for over 100 years. That same river, historically separating them, intertwined their paths in the aftermath of the pipeline conflicts in our state. Over the past 7 years, they have been co-creating a film to host difficult conversations about our shared history in North Dakota and where to go from here.
My grandmother was born in Old Kennel, South Dakota, across the river from Linton.
My grandfather, Harry Nagel, was born in a sod house southwest of Linton, across the river from Standing Rock.
My grandmother was born in a town that is now underwater.
The nearest town was Winona, where my grandfather was born, and that is now underwater.
I was born at St. Alexius Hospital in Bismarck, North Dakota in the 70s.
I was born at St. Alexius Hospital in Bismarck, North Dakota in the 1970s.
I grew up 1 block away from Sioux Avenue in Fort Yates, North Dakota.
I grew up 1 block away from Sioux Avenue in Bismarck, North Dakota.
I was born into a Roman Catholic family.
I was baptized Roman Catholic.
We went to church every Sunday at our church in Kennel, South Dakota, packed in the back of our family station wagon.
We went to church every Sunday of my life, and no matter how much the kids would beg to maybe not go to church this week, we owed Rome, Italy 1 hour of our time.
My zodiac sign is Leo.
My zodiac sign is Leo.
I have a daughter named Lily.
I have a daughter named Lily.
My husband was born in the United Kingdom.
My wife was born in Europe, Poland.
My people were promised freedom on our lands through the treaty process.
The Russian government promised my German ancestors freedom of language, freedom of religion, and to be able to have their own little colony there in Odessa, Russia.
The United States government made it illegal for us to speak our language.
The Russian government made it illegal later to speak our language.
The United States government forbid us from practicing our religion.
The Russian government forbid us from practicing our religion.
The United States government stole our land.
The Russian government stole our land.
The United States government confined my ancestors to open-air prisons.
The Russian government sent my ancestors to slave camps in Siberia to die. The Russian government broke its promises.
The United States government broke its promises.
My ancestors escaped and came to North Dakota as refugees.
This land, this place is the only place that my ancestors have ever known as home.
My family's been here for 130 years.
My family has been here for thousands of years.
My name is Jim Kambeitz.
My name is Nicole Donaghy. Thank you for joining us this morning. Jim and I, our paths have crossed many times over the years, since 2016 and maybe even before then. I started with Dakota Resource Council as a field organizer, and everywhere I went during that time within my work and the things that I cared about, Jim was always there with the camera. We've been together in these same places, working with community organizing, education, building clean energy in this place that we call home, which is and always has been largely segregated.
And looking at it, I think it was Kevin Locke who said, God must really have a sense of humor. He took these very obsessive German workaholic folks without much senses of humor, and he put them right next to people on Standing Rock. Always joking, always full of life, two exact opposites. And if we look at it, we're a patriarchy, largely.
And our culture, we are a matriarchy.
We're a written tradition.
We're oral tradition.
On a map, north is on the top.
On a map, north is down.
We pray indoors.
We pray outdoors.
We believe there's such a thing as private property.
We don't believe in owning property.
We own the earth.
Our children own the earth, and the earth owns us.
Capitalist culture with a lot of fences.
Barter and trade-based culture.
I didn't really realize how segregated Bismarck was growing up here. And then all of a sudden we had this protest, this No Dapple movement, and there were hundreds of indigenous people from here all over the city. And sometimes the Capitol grounds would be full of people from here and singing songs and praying. And I said, wow, yeah, this is a physical reminder that this is whose land we're on. And what a different city dynamic to have an equal balance in cultures. But I also saw this fear and this anger and all of the stuff that we haven't talked about bubbling up, and people so angry. My neighbors saying things that I've never heard them, I never imagined they could say. I live next to some really nice people. And it's like, whoa, this was in this guy? How did my neighbor even come up with those words? And I realized, well, something is buried here. Something's going on in this community. And we're really segregated and not connected. So I started thinking about, well, how could we change this? And what would a new dynamic be in our community? So I was asking this question and looking for people who wanted to change this together, and I didn't know who I would find. But I knew I wanted not a one-directional relationship in this community, it's a domination culture, European domination code. I wanted a bi-directional. So what would it be like if we were truly equal and if we did everything equally? What if I never spoke about anyone indigenous without them? And they spoke for themselves, even better. So how do we do this?
So throughout these series of events, Jim and I decided to have a conversation about the way the stories were being told in North Dakota. If you think back to the Dakota Access Pipeline movement and remember the media that came out back in those days, I was a terrorist because of the way I looked. We were eco-terrorists. We were here to wreak havoc in our community. I worked in a building in Bismarck as an organizer. Our buildings would go on lockdown because we were by the bridge and there was a prayer demonstration outside. And so we wanted to have a way to have these conversations, and Understanding Films was born out of these conversations. After No Dapple, we kept seeing each other at the same events, and we proposed the question, can we use film to unite our two cultures in a new way to address the disconnect and to create more understanding? So the Understanding Project was born and created by our group, and many hands contributed to this creation. And Mary, you were also a part of the early processes.
Yeah, we interviewed hundreds of people from Standing Rock and from Bismarck and all over the state. And we kept asking, well, what do we do with this? Who do we want to see this? And we don't want this just to be a film that goes out and then who knows if anyone on Netflix saw it or what. What is more important is what can we do in North Dakota to use this as a conversation to help create some kind of a new relationship or a new healing or a new understanding. So we thought, well, let's have events. Let's invite the state of North Dakota. Let's invite law enforcement officers who were at the pipeline protests to sit down next to folks from Standing Rock who led it, elders, children. Let's bring community together. So we can use a piece of film. We can watch a 5-minute segment of film, and then we talk about these deeper subjects. And we started trying to figure out how we could do that and what we could do with the film. And that's been several years, and we've made dozens and dozens of versions of this film, anywhere from 5-minute samples to half an hour to 4-hour samples. We hosted an event a year or two ago where we had Dave Archambault Sr., so the father of the chairman at that time during the movement there, and then we had the Bismarck mayor, Mike Seminary, in dialogue together, talking intimately about their experiences and what it was like to be a human, and what was traumatizing, what was difficult, and how to unite ourselves and talk through the trauma together. We had licensed therapist, trauma therapist Tammy Dakota lead it, and we kept coming back to, well, how do we make this film? How do we do this film? And our editing team kept saying, well, you need to be in the film. You need to tell your story because you're from North Dakota. We don't need these folks from California parachuting in and making films about us. We need 2 North Dakotans telling their story from each side of the river. And we kept saying, no, we're not going to be in this film for about 5 years. No, we're not doing it. We're behind the camera. And eventually we finally caved and said, okay, whatever you got to do. This is what you think needs to happen. We're going to try it. So we wanted to show a little bit of a sample of this first round of shooting and editing. It's to just show the concept, and we have all these other interviews of really great elders and really wise people that we feel are way more important than us to be on the camera. We haven't yet got them all edited in. You'll just see little bits and pieces of us talking about the project and knowing that we're at this phase where it's going to be born into something different, but this is just a little sample in the concept. So we're going to play a few minutes.
Hahakaska emachia pe na washichu ea John Eagle Sr. hemacha. Hunchapa hemacha na chanka ocha teoshpa emataha. Na wambli khoyak mani emataha. My relatives, you may be wondering why I started in my language. That's the most respect that we can show you, is to speak to you in one of the first languages ever spoken on this land. When you think about the wisdom of my ancestors and why they taught us to introduce ourselves in that way, it's so that as good relatives we're going to listen to each other. But it also prepares us for that day, like today, where we might not be agreeing with one another. That if we look at each other as relatives, we always have that to fall back on. I understand what you and your witnesses said. But I also think I understand why you're willing to take that risk. Because it's not happening in your backyard. It's not happening in that place that you call home. It's happening in our backyard, us North Dakotans. I look at the room behind me now, and I've been staring at this all day. And it really seems to be a metaphor to how our peoples are today. Because there were no signs saying white people sit over there and Indians sit over there. But yet we took our respective places apart from one another. And you know, when you look at it, at some point in our histories, those of us who live here in North Dakota, our stories crossed. They merged with one another.
chema kaya hane hapa mene we chone wa kaya la hada heya.
About an expansion proposal to the Dakota Access Pipeline.
That meeting continues in the Emmons County Courthouse, and that's where Robert Sir was for a good part of the day. Hi, Robert.
As you said, it was standing room only inside the Emmons County Courthouse today about a well-known topic to our state, that being the Dakota Access Pipeline. Texas-based Energy Transfer wants to expand the capacity of the Dakota Access Pipeline from its current 600,000 barrels a day to over 1.1 million barrels. To accomplish this, the company wants to build a pumping station just outside of Linton, much to the dismay of the tribal community. Tribal lawyers and members of the North Dakota Public Service Commission rigorously cross-examined pipeline infrastructure consultants as well as members from Energy Transfer.
Is that one type of risk associated with the pipeline, that it may have a negative occurrence, a spill or a leak? A leak is a risk of pipeline.
The film is called Understanding Rock because there is a genuine misunderstanding of what actually happened here, of why it happened here, why North Dakota, why Standing Rock. And it comes with hundreds of years of events and history that culminated at the site of the northern border of Ian-Waslaw, of the Standing Rock Nation.
In order to understand what happened here at Standing Rock, we have to go back and understand the history. And to understand how people in North Dakota who are seen as the peace garden state, these peaceful, nice people, turned into more angry than I've ever seen my neighbors.
So many films have been made and so many people have come to North Dakota and have taken what they see as what actually happened here. And it's time for North Dakota, Standing Rock. Those stories need to be told from the people that live here and will continue to be here.
I'm Jim Kambeitz. I am a German North Dakotan from Bismarck. So I grew up on this street, knew every single neighbor by name. We were literally surrounded by Mandan Street, Arikara, Sioux Avenue, so we're surrounded by the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and the whole MHA Nation. Yeah, on my street, there's only one family that's still there, and it's my mom and dad.
So did you feel connected to the land you grew up on? Were you always outside?
We were outside all the time. And the prairie was amazing. It still feels like this calming home base. I loved growing up here. Everybody says Bismarck is a great place to raise children. It was ultimate freedom. Like we would skateboard. I remember so often we'd be skateboarding down the street with our arms out and just like eyes closed, just like floating down the street. It was like you're flying. I mean, we grew up and this was always, hey, let's go to Arrowhead. And you never really thought about, well, wait, why is it called Arrowhead? But I didn't even think about Native Americans really growing up because you didn't see them. I was literally surrounded by all these indigenous signs. It was basically a segregated white city when I grew up. So you lived a block off of Sioux Avenue.
On Weir Street.
And I lived a block off of Sioux Avenue on Seminole Street.
Fort Yates is what people call the capital of Standing Rock. The landmasses peninsula. We're almost completely surrounded by water from Lake Oahe. And I grew up on the west side of the Missouri River in Fort Yates, and we would fish and swim and collect rocks and just spend time along the shores And I would often look across the river and you could see lights. And I remember asking my dad, what's over there? And he would be like, that's Linton.
That whole area where my dad grew up in Napoleon and my mom in Linton, Strasburg, Wishick. Linton is a farming town, and almost everybody came there to farm. And they're homesteaders.
You see the blue and white house there? Straight down. We planted those trees that surround the house. You can see like all of the water that surrounds Fort Yates. And we as Lakota people know, we know that everything has a life force and everything has a life. And one of the phrases that came up during the No Dapple movement was Mini Wachoni, and that means the power of water, that water is its own life. Water is a life force. You can't hear anything else but the water. And it's healing.
My name is Kambeitz Chinkalawi. I am a citizen of Eomoslaw, Standing Rock. My English name is Nicole Montclair Donaghy. I grew up on the reservation, and I love growing up on the reservation when people talk about how it's so impoverished and that people are very poor, but they don't understand that we're not poor culturally. We're not poor with our values. I grew up in a very loving household. We didn't have everything that we wanted, but we had everything that we needed. And my dad made sure of that. And my parents taught us the value of hard work, and they taught us the value of having a good education.
My great-grandparents were forbidden to speak their language. They had their land stolen by the Russian nation. They lost their freedom and were forced to fight for the Russian army.
The government was afraid of what we did. They were afraid of our prayers. They were afraid of us worshiping together. The Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 came into play, and then we were allowed to be spiritual. We were allowed to hold a nipi. We were allowed to hold sweats. Until that point, our religion was illegal. Those are the after effects of colonization.
My grandpa and grandma loved to fish on the river, right across the river from Standing Rock. My mom grew up across the river from your mom. Mm-hmm. And when I was little, we would go to Linton for wedding dances and to be at my mom's farm and see Grandpa and Grandma. I remember hearing German all the time. My grandparents spoke in German, told all their jokes in German that they didn't want kids to hear. And we went down to the river bottoms, happiest ever. My grandparents, they were really quiet, peaceful people. They prayed a lot. When they were on their tractors and farming, they would be praying the rosary all day long. My grandpa's rosary was like paper thin. He wore the wood down so much because he prayed it for so many years, every day, all day long as he worked. North Dakotans have always had the reputation of being the nicest people on the planet. If a farmer breaks his leg during harvest and all the community gets together and all the other farmers come and harvest his crop, that's what I know as North Dakota.
I used to ride our bike down here. We would ride our bikes down here and find salamanders and frogs, play in the water. I remember my dad would set up a tent and we would come down here and fish all day and swim and play in the water. Here's the basketball courts that they built up here. When I was probably about 15 years old, we would come down here. That's where they built
So
them.
this is where you played basketball?
I played basketball here, and then we would play downtown at the courts we were at earlier. I want my kids to know where they come from. And I was talking to an elder a few years ago, and he talked about how we need to remember, reconnect, and reclaim. And that's what's happening. The seventh generation that you hear so much about is now, and it's 7 generations ahead of us. And so that 7th generation is awakening, and we're
remembering who we are as leaders. We're remembering who we are as Lakota, as Mandan. We're reconnecting to our identity, learning our language, learning our sacred ways, going to our ceremonies. We're reconnecting and we're reclaiming. We're building that power, and we're coming back to who we are as Indigenous people. And so the spirit and the fire of Standing Rock is still burning, just as it was when Sitting Bull was here.
The perspective that you're putting together of our German from Russia ancestry and what happened to us and how that, you know, is similar. And that was always something I thought about when all of this was happening. I was just like, do North Dakotans not remember where they came from and what happened to them? Like, that they can't relate to what has happened to our Native American communities? Have we really forgotten? Have we gotten that far from our ancestry and where we come from that we've forgotten that? And I think it's really, and I don't think it's very well talked about either. I know my grandmother, when I'd ask her where we came from as a child, she didn't know a lot. She said her dad refused to talk about it, that he had burned all their papers, and he's just like, never going back there. It was horrible. And they were starving. And so I think it's important to remind the younger generations in that education part of this, on both sides, where we come from, that our stories, in some ways, there is a common narrative there of the struggle to survive.
And extinguish the chalice with words from Indigenous writer and organizer Kelly Hayes. Solidarity is not mere acknowledgement of harm, but a willingness to challenge injustice in real time. Acknowledgement on its own avails us nothing, but solidarity, commitment, and collective action have the power to set us free.
Put a little love in your heart. Put a little love in your heart. You want the world to know you won't let hatred grow. Put a little love in your heart. I hope when you decide this will be your guide. Put a little love in your heart, and the world will be a better place. And the world will be a better place for you and me. Just wait.